Immigration, Posse Comitatus, and the Insurrection Act. We're going to talk about the complex issues and definitions of involving some of the stuff that Herr Trump is already implementing and going on. So we hear a lot about this ICE roundup and the immigration issues in the United States. And though a lot of you bots and other assorted bitter types like to, whenever I talk about Trump, you just say crazy things to me, even though I don't like Trump, but I give good basic information. So I'm going to try to stick to that on this one. So before we talk about Trump's immigration policy and what's going on, let's talk about what was the state of America's population right now, going in 2025 as Trump implemented what's going on now, which, though it's all over the news, a lot less people have been rounded up than you might think. I think only, how long has it been? It's only been 4 months. 60. Maybe like 150,000 have only been deported. 29% of which are criminals, but I'll get into that in a minute. So first of all, it is true. Now this is interesting, and we're going to get into some economic things and its relation to demography, the population. When 2025 opened, 15.8% of the U.S. population, at least, because often, of course, illegal immigrants are going to tend to be a little bit underestimated, but I think the highest estimate, 15.8% of the country was foreign born. That's that's 1 out of 6 Americans foreign born, and taking into account large parts of the country, Metro Detroit, lots of the Midwest, parts of the South, there's always going to be some foreign born, but not too many. Here in LA County, who knows? I didn't bother to look it up. I would imagine if it's 16% nationally, it might be a third here that are actually born in another country. That's the highest ever been since records were kept. In the 1890s, it was almost as high, but not as high. It might have been a little under 15%. So the years of Trump and Biden's presidency saw the most people coming over in raw numbers and in terms of the percentage of the population. And so even we know about Ellis Island and all that era, more people were coming over by volume. I'm going to just give up on my hair, guys. It's windy out here on the 5th floor of the Indie Right Studios. So this country had become, is the most foreign born it's ever been. Is that good or is that bad? I mean, that's a different question, but that is true. More people the last several years, like 2022, I think it was more like during the pandemic and a year after, saw 2 million people a year, of which 2/3, I think, or so were illegal immigrants. So that's a real issue. Anyone that's watching this, consider yourself left or someone that's protesting ICE and all that, not to say you shouldn't, but if you didn't know, that's not made up. The idea that the country is awash in people from other countries, and many of the recent ones here not through proper processes. Again, is that good, is that bad? It's a separate question, but that is the case. So having a whole lot of people from different countries does change the culture of a country. Now, as we know, if we're sophisticated adults, as I hope you are, the only constant in life is change. America of 2025 is not going to be the America of 1990 or 1980 or 1950, nor should it be, because things change. But how do they change? Who does it benefit? Who does it hurt? I know, like, for example, me and Cavario, when we're traveling, we don't love being in Detroit just because Detroit at this point is so, it's so economically depressed. There's not a lot to do. But we love Chicago, and we were trying to figure out, we were like, why in the hell do we love Chicago just so much? I mean, downtown Chicago and the nice part of Chicago is great. And we came to the conclusion, it reminded us, at least in the areas we were, it was basically, or at least what we were noticing, it was white people and black people. It was like, it probably reminded us, we thought, of our childhood. And people always, if you're, something reminds you of your childhood, it tends to put you in a good mood. Just so there were less foreigners. And that doesn't mean that's good. It's just reminding you of your childhood. So, New York, on the other hand, is a different. New York feels very different. A lot of, I mean, even like neighborhoods that have been black for a long time in New York and that are still black, they're not the same black people. Like the FBAs have been swapped out for Africans and Caribbeans. Doesn't mean that I'm not putting a value judgment of good or bad, but they are people with a different culture. Now, when it comes to swapping out foreigners for Americans whose ancestors come from the South, be they white or black, it's often that comes with better social and economic outcomes. For example, anyone that thinks that people of African descent, have lower IQ or don't do well in school or something, people that describe themselves as West Indian, like black people from Jamaica, Trinidad, Tobago, all those places. That has the, I don't know what in the 2020 census, but even in the 2010 census, that was the third highest. People of West Indies descent had the third highest per household income, median household income. Only Japanese and Korean were higher. So West Indian, people that describe themselves as West Indian had higher median per capita household than people that describe themselves as German, Irish, or English. So the culture of the West Indies or the Caribbean, the Black Caribbean, Haitians, at least the ones that come here, they're very into education, family-oriented, work-oriented. In New York, Jamaican neighborhoods are not, we may have heard of Jamaican gangsters, like Italians have gangsters, but as far as street crime and all that, they're much more like other immigrant groups, right? They're insular, but the street crime and all that, there's stronger family structures. So many immigrants have stronger family structures than the low end of American society of native-born people. So anyways, America in 2025 dawned as a country with its highest percentage of foreign-born, a sixth for the whole country, and in some parts of the country it's probably more like a quarter or a third of shit. There's probably places where it's half. And many of them are here illegally. And as somebody myself, and I'm sure many people watching, if you've ever been cuffed up and made to be in jail for a day, a week, a month, a year, God forbid longer than that, because you broke the law, it's kind of hard to think, well, how am I supposed to feel it's unjust or oppressive that people that snuck in, they're not even supposed to be in the whole goddamn country, the idea that if they get cuffed up and deported, that's evil and fascist. It isn't. So I don't like Trump for a variety of reasons, and a bunch of things is going on, but the idea that we shouldn't be, or that it's some evil thing to be arresting people and deporting people that are not legally here, well, that's absurd. I wouldn't have a problem if we didn't do it, but I can't say that it's wrong that we're doing it. And as far as the conditions are in and all that, well, listen, jail ain't too damn comfortable. I mean, it's a problem. It's a difficult problem. As long as they're actually getting people that aren't supposed to be here. Now, of course, as we know, Trump uses everything for propaganda, the whole Kilmar Abrego thing. So, if you don't, that's so-called. He started off, they photoshopped MS-13 on his knuckles. They sent him to El Salvador. His lawyers got him out of that. It's a good thing he had a family to advocate. Finally, they sent him to the Sudan. The U.S. has all these weird agreements with little countries like in Africa. Africa and countries are taking some of our people. In the Sudan, which is a war-torn, poverty-stricken country, I don't know, they probably got a cash payment from the U.S. They repatriated them to Mexico or El Salvador, wherever he's from. Okay, so there's that. In 1924, so I said in 1890, the U.S., that was the time it was the closest to the same percentage of foreign-born that we have now. Of course, we know in the 19-teens and the 20s, we know about Ellis Island and people streaming through. In 1924, actually, very draconian immigration measures were placed. That was the time when basically if you weren't from England, France, Germany, Belgium, Luxembourg, it was almost impossible to migrate here. What effect did that have on the economy? Well, the economy boomed for another 5 years, and then, as we know, we had the Great Depression. If a bunch of immigrants desperate to work had come into the country during the Great Depression, would that have ended the Great Depression? Would it have made it worse? That's an interesting question for history. For those of you that think you know how the Great Depression ended, if you think that it was FDR's, well, implementation of what? We live in a, just so you know, we live in a country that's a Frankenstein of kind of laissez-faire capitalism and fascism, but it's also a socialist country in the terms that we have a massive Social Security is a socialist. I mean, it's a social redistribution of wealth. So, but anyways, FDR's public works program, FDR's various programs, implementation of Social Security and all the rest, Keynesian economics, borrowing money to stimulate the economy, it didn't work all that well. When he came in as president in 1932 and implemented a bunch of stuff, it got better, but not that much better. And in fact, there was another big dip, I think, in for those who don't know, I have a master's in economics, so this is my technical field of expertise. There was another big dip in 38, 39. World War II stopped the Great Depression. What would have happened without World War II? Hard to say. Hard to say. That opened up an unparalleled era of technological innovation and economic growth during the war and after. Now, as a quick aside, I think we talk a lot about, well, this immigration thing we're going to get into a lot of about, well, also Trump's threatening to put in the Insurrection Act. He sent the National Guard to D.C. Now he wants to send it to Chicago. He wants to militarize the police in a lot of cities. A lot of that is tied in with the idea the cities have problems. In fact, rural white areas have much worse outcomes on a whole than the cities do right now. We'll get into that later. But as a quick aside, interesting to know, just know this. We think of, I don't know, when do you think the cities really went into bad decline? I bet a lot of you would say the 70s to 80s maybe. As far as jobs, well, let's take the city that went from the best to the worst. 1960, Metro Detroit, number one household income of any metro area in the country. Detroit Public Schools was fabulous. Detroit's rich suburbs, Oakland County, Grosse Pointe, they were richer. They were better than the Upper East Side of Manhattan and Beverly Hills. In fact, as late as the 2010 census for sure, maybe even now. Grosse Pointe, there's a bunch of Grosse Pointe Farms, Grosse Pointe Shores, but the real Grosse Pointe, which is a suburb on the eastern edge of Detroit, is richer than Beverly Hills. Now, small area, Beverly Hills is bigger, but it's a city. That place is so rich and is such old money that when Henry Ford's son was getting married, he married a girl whose family lived in Grosse Pointe, and they didn't know if they were going to let her marry Henry Ford's son. because they were new money and they weren't shit compared to them. Think about that. That was the people that lived there initially. That was lumber and mining money from the 1840s, 50s. Detroit was a capital of, I think at one point Detroit was America's stove production capital. And lumber, huge lumber. Well, anyway, so when do you think Detroit, city limits of Detroit, not Metro Detroit, not Michigan, what year do you think the city limits of Detroit had the peak number of industrial jobs? Auto jobs, industrial jobs. It's 1951. Detroit has been losing industrial jobs since 1952. The east side of Detroit, I don't remember the exact number, and if you're interested in this stuff, you should read a book, Thomas Sugru, The Origins of the Urban Crisis in Detroit. Between 52 and 59 or something, the east side, one side of Detroit, which was more heavily industrialized, lost 120,000 industrial jobs. This is in the 50s. They were moving out of the city. Another quick aside for my economics buffs. Why were the jobs leaving the city limits? What changed in American manufacturing after World War II? Remember that we ran into this economic stasis between 1929 or 1930 and the World War. Not much was built. So there was a big pent-up demand. A lot of factories were built during World War II and immediate aftermath all through the 50s. That was the rise of suburbia, and we think of people moving to live in suburbia, but also the factories went out there. Why? Well, the first Ford plant, the Model T factory, Manchester and Woodward, that's my neighborhood where I grew up at, Highland Park, Michigan. It was once the most important place in the world economically, and now, well, when I was growing up, and now that's whatever the worst neighborhood you've ever been to in terms of danger and crime, it's highly unlikely it's anywhere nearly as dangerous and messed up as the area I grew up in near the original Model T plant. But the Model T plant was vertical. So when they were doing the assembly line, they had to lift the engines up and the parts or lower them down. So if you've had high school physics, you know lifting and lowering takes a lot more energy than pushing. So all the new factories that were built during the war and after, they went out into suburbia, that undeveloped land, and instead of having a 6-story factory, you have a mile-long factory. Go Google the new Tesla plants or something. Some of them are 2 miles long and a 1/4 mile wide. There is no second floor. Or maybe they have a second floor for some offices or something. But you want parts moving. The Amazon warehouses, some of them I've driven past some that look to be 1/2 mile long or something. So the whole physical infrastructure of things changed. So that's just an interesting aside if you're interested in that. So back to the immigration. So having 16% of the population not be born here changes things. Now it's important to know that as illegal immigration was growing, it grew tremendously under Ronald Reagan and the first Bush. Why would that be? Well, of course, if you have illegal immigrants who not only aren't going to unionize, you can pay below minimum wage, just having them in the economy at all is going to exert downward pressure on wages, which is what we've seen. That's why the American working class, white people and black people, but there's a lot more white people than there are black people, so primarily the non-college educated whites have seen their economic opportunities erode. It isn't because illegal immigrants came and stole their jobs, it's because the Republicans wanted them here as a tool to keep your wages lower, and it worked. Wages, not earnings, not people that are on salary, but people that earn hourly adjusted for inflation. Would you know that hourly wages are very similar to what they were, adjusted for inflation, as they were in 1974. So all the growth in the U.S. economy since the mid-'70s has gone to pretty much people with college degrees, and then especially capitalist people that own stuff, the richest of the rich. But you already know that. That's not any new information. So certainly the idea that getting some of these illegal immigrants out of the country will be helpful to the wages of people that are here certainly sounds good. Is it going to work in reality? Well, it's a lot more complicated than that. For example, let's take the example of the textile industry. Up until NAFTA, early to mid 90s, there was still a substantial production of cotton, of clothing in the primarily American South, t-shirts and stuff like that. Now, LA is the capital of t-shirt production now in America, but they're expensive as F. This is the home of the premium blank. I'm wearing a LA Apparel, $20 for a blank t-shirt at the LA Apparel store. Ain't no logo on this. This is a blank. Because they pay, an LA living wage, $20-some an hour for the people that work here. Back, again, up through the early 90s, there were hundreds and hundreds of thousands of people in the U.S. South employed making T-shirts, cotton sheets, and etc. With the rise of NAFTA, where you could have people do the same stuff for the equivalent of, $1 or $2 an hour south of the border, those jobs went away. So the people that were worked in the textile industry, NAFTA was bad for them. NAFTA was bad for anyone in America that had a job that could be outsourced, because they were. Now, on the flip side, if the price of American, in this example, low-end textiles, or not exactly low-end, but cheap sheets, t-shirts, which are things everyone has and has a lot of, if those prices go down because you're able to get them made cheaper, that means all of us will be spending less of our income on t-shirts and sheets, so we can spend more on other stuff. One of the most amazing differences in America now, from even like in the 80s even, up through, I would say really up through the mid to late 90s, but definitely, up through the early 90s, there weren't all these restaurants. Like, when I was a kid, early 80s, there would be a handful of, what were known as fancy restaurants. You had your ethnic, you might have your little Mexican town, Greek town that had a few family-owned restaurants. You had diners, right, where you could get meatloaf and breakfast. And that was it. Hamburger stand. I mean, you had your McDonald's. But all this Bennigan's, Red Lobster, all that stuff is from that. Probably started some of them in the late 70s, but that was the 80s when all those swept, the mid to late 80s of the 90s, swept across the country. And of course now with all these, there's just so many. If you're in a big city, you really, unless you like cooking as a hobby, it's really not worth grocery shopping and cooking. You damn near eat out all the time because there's restaurants everywhere and shopping at the grocery store is so expensive. So a lot of jobs, a lot of people that are working, the economic theory is economy changes, people that lose a job in one thing, like the textile industry, you move into something else like being a server at a restaurant. But the kind of places that lost textile jobs aren't the kind of places that maybe have as many restaurants. So you see these depressed regions that never recovered. But economic change in a country with laissez-faire capitalism, places don't recover. Counties in the American South along the Mississippi Delta, where cotton was at, where slaves were at, when the black people left from there en masse starting after World War I, there's many counties in the Mississippi Delta that have less people now than they did in the year 1880. Because there's no reason to be there. So there's always winners and losers. And in an economy this big and diverse, you need to think about how you can be a winner. And often it's really based on geography and who's in bad position now. If you're somewhere, Outside of the metropolitan areas, things are kind of bleak economically in general. What does this have to do with rounding up illegal immigrants by ICE? Very hard to say. I guess the idea is you take away the Mexicans that are standing at Home Depot, and what? White and black guys that are currently living in a tent are going to go stand up there. It's a nice idea, but culturally, I was watching, this was maybe a while ago, Vice did a thing maybe in maybe Trump's first presidency, where they were first going around checking on agricultural workers. So this was a farmer in Alabama that had a big commercial farm. And Alabama was the first state to really aggressively get rid of the illegal immigrants working the farms. And he was a good old boy. He had the redneck drawl. And he said, yeah, ever since they took the Mexicans, he said I shut down my farm. He said I would hire the people from around here, white people and black people, this rural Alabama. He said the black workers would work. They were about half as productive as the Mexicans, and the white people would show up on their first day, and they would work till lunch, and they would never come back from lunch break. They didn't even want to work. I think that psychologically, just from watching TV, it'd be hard to be white in America and think that you're supposed to be picking zucchini for a living, because you're not trained to think that that's appropriate for you, even if you personally are living in a tent. That's why these people will agree. They'll ask you for money as if you owe it to them. Hey, man, let me get a couple dollars. Excuse me, sir, do I owe you? Oh my God, I just thought of something I should do on YouTube as like a prank experiment. Do you dare me? What if I get fake little blue pills or little fake things of crystal meth and put them in little bags, and we have a hidden camera, we pull up on people and they're like, oh, I'm looking to work a couple dollars, and I'm like, oh bro, I ain't got no cash, but you want a couple of these? Oh my God. If you think I should do that, put that in the comments. Should we do that? How many of these people would take free Drizzugs? Well, they'll be fake Drizzugs. Now, what's okay? So, the United States. So if Trump's deportation stuff, he's never going to meet his 10 million thing. There's just not enough manpower. But some people have calculated that even this year, if he can manage to deport 500,000, combined with the fact that there's barely any illegal immigration, he has effectively shut that down. Also, there's things on the other side of the border less desirable to come, but either way, there's not that much illegal immigration. If he keeps illegal immigration close to zero, and he grabs 500,000 and deports them, remember, our birth rate, just like all the other advanced countries, is getting pretty low. The United States may experience this. We did not even experience during COVID. Part of the reason was because we had so many illegal immigrants coming in. 2025 may be the first year of population decrease ever in United States history. Now, when you put it in those terms, is that good or bad? That's pretty wild. And understand that how does an economy grow? It grows through more economic activity. Al Prophet bought more Percocets this year than last year. That's a growth in the GDP. But it also grows from there being more people primarily. And that's part of the reason all you people that are tricked into thinking gold is so important. The reason I got off the gold standard is if you have a finite supply of money, if the money is linked to gold or that stupid ass Bitcoin that you all are going to cash out, if you got some, then you're not flexible with the money supply. If there's more human beings and they start doing more stuff, so E equals MV, the total size of the economy. That's not a gangster disciple sign. That's E for economy. equals MV. It equals the money supply times this velocity of money. How many times money changes hands? So I think the average dollar in the U.S. I think it's around 34 or 36 or something. That's how many times the average dollar changes hands each year. So for the size of the economy to get bigger, we either have to increase V, the circulation of money, or M, the money supply. That's why when we go into an economic downturn, they print out more money to boost up the economy. Now, with the growing population, so something interesting has been happening these last few years. Despite inflation, despite the pandemic, the U.S. economy has been very resilient, has been growing very robustly. That may well be because there's so many illegal immigrants in the country, along with the false hype of AI. That ain't shit, but that's another story. I think like 2/3 of 75% of the stock market's growth is in those the 7 tech stocks that are all saying AI, Facebook, Nvidia, blah, blah, blah. But read about LLMs being at their limit, but that's another story. And read about synthetic data, which is they're making up fake data to train computers that are supposed to predict human behavior for generative AI. It's getting weird out here. Less people is going to be a less growing economy. Will the white people and black people and native-born Hispanics and Asians and whatever that have been out of the workforce, will they move back into the workforce to replace? And one thing, despite what they might tell you on the TV, almost anyone that's bothering to illegally enter the United States, they want to work. They want to work. They're working. I mean, can you imagine standing how many of you would go stand outside somewhere? That concept of men who didn't have a job but will go stand at a Home Depot and just do it and work was so alien. When I had a misunderstanding with the law in Arizona, and they forced me to live after I did my time in a tent city jail. I had to live for 6 months there before I could come back. My father had to come set me up an apartment. And, he ain't got no bunch of money, so he got me what he could afford. And when he was getting out, he's like, yeah, he had like a sad look on his face, and he's like, yeah, I don't know, I might have messed up. I was like, what? He said, I'm sorry, I might have got you an apartment in a gay Mexican neighborhood. I was like, I said, there's plenty of gay Mexicans, but I never heard of a gay Mexican neighborhood. What does that mean? What are you talking about? He was like, yeah, well, a lot of times I'm at the red light and there's like Mexican men, they're just hanging out, making eye contact. I said, Mexican men making eye contact with the red light. And then I said, hold on. I said, is this because he told me what neighborhood I was living in. I said, is this at the intersection of such and such where there's that Home Depot? He said, oh yeah, you know about that? I said, yeah, I know about it because they're looking for work. They're day laborers. Coming from Detroit, he didn't even know that existed. And Detroit's very full of unemployment, but people don't go stand outside looking for no work. They just try and go and get that work, if you catch my drift. Shout out to West Virginia. Shout out to Huntington. Shout out to Wheeling. Shout out to Kentucky. Or West V, as it's known colloquially in the Detroit rapping circles. Doing a turnaround. I remember I used to do rap videos in Detroit. That was the first time I heard that phrase, just a long time ago. I go to be like, all right, Al. I'm like, all right, well, I'll get started on a video. Just give me a deposit. They're like, all right, I said, I go do a West V turnaround. I'm going to have that 500 for you tonight. I was like, a West V turnaround? He's like, I got to take this boy, and by boy, I don't mean a young male of the human species. I mean Huron. I got to take this boy to West V, and then I'll be back, and I had that money for you. And I used to, at first, before I knew how it worked, I was like, hold on. All these black guys be y'all are going to these little small towns in Kentucky and West Virginia selling dope. But then I found out there's local African Americans there that the Detroit people go and hook up with them and sell them the dope, and they deal with the local white dope fiends. But that's according to indictments I've read. I have no personal knowledge of that. Shout out to all the guys. So, the economy may go into a decline because of less human beings or less illegal immigrants. And I can tell you, like, where my desert house is in the Coachella Valley, which has some poor cities like Indio, but then it has a bunch of wealthy areas. Where I live at, we live in an old neighborhood where there's regular houses, some of which are still less than $1 million. Everything else around there is all gated community with multi-million-dollar houses. There is definitely, when I was first there, 2019, lots of Hispanic gentlemen knocking on your door when you want to do the pool, do the yard. They're not really around. And you know who replaced them? The most dangerous people who, if they knock on your door, do not answer is them Eastern Europeans. Ukrainians showing up talking about, we'll do your pool. Oh, no, you won't. Oh, no, Eastern Europeans they're the toughest, roughest people. They need to be the new gangster rappers. They're much tougher than African Americans. They are all tough criminals. Do you know that when we had a Ukrainian pool boy, I told my buddy, I said, do not trust him. This guy stole our pool pump and disappeared. Like, he just took our pool pump. So I don't see any of the any white or black native born Americans that aren't working. Everybody's on all them people at the bottom of society, they're on disability. They get their $900 a month. They buy enough fatty blues to sell it, to break even, sell a few, smoke a few. They get their $900 a month. They got some vendored housing. They're keeping their 90-year-old mother who shouldn't be dead. They keeping her on life support in the back rooms. They can get her checked. They ain't about to show up at my house trying to do the pool. So you're gonna see a disruption in the economy. You take all these people away. And look where they're going to find these people at. They're going to job sites. They're going to Home Depot. They just ran up in that Hyundai plant. They run up in meatpacking plants. We're going to feel it. And it's going to raise inflation. So all of you, well, we're all impacted by it boggles my mind how much groceries cost me. I truly, not being fun, I don't understand how people that even have like a regular decent income. If you make $1,100 a week and you live in a city, like, it's got to be hard. You would have to be in a couple. Had to be two of you making $1,100 a week. I don't like. You could go to the grocery store and spend $100 on nothing. You can go to a goddamn restaurant. I was watching a guy, Pootie, black guy that does like food reviews in different cities. He was in Atlanta. Went to like T.I.'s restaurant. It was like $50. He was like, I got nothing. He got like 2 sliders, a shrimp taco, and some lettuce and some fries. It was like $40. Like, you remove, and I'm not saying it's good to pay people below minimum wage or any of that stuff, but the reality, you remove all these low wage workers, of which there's a lot, and that's who's being rounded up. It will push up prices on certain consumer goods. It's going to push up prices on the necessities. So on the things, no matter what your income is, you got to buy food, toilet paper. You got to go to the Walmarts of the world. So taking away those people out of the economy may theoretically open up job opportunities that I don't think the kind of people that aren't working are capable of taking advantage of, nor do they want to. And it's gonna cause inflation. So I do not think it's theoretically wrong to be rounding up illegal immigrants, but it's going to have a lot of impacts you might not be ready for, primarily lowered overall economic growth and inflation and a certain basket of goods. So there's that. So I'm not really making a value judgment. I'm just telling you it's very complex. It's certainly not, oh, get rid of these people and everybody's wages go up and there'll be jobs. And that ain't true. Most of the people that are working, and unemployment is very low. People are out of the labor force. There's so many, I think like 15% of non-college educated white males are no longer even in the labor force. There's so many people on disability, or they've been unemployed for so long, they're a discouraged worker, they're not even looking, they're not counted in the unemployment. Look up how unemployment is calculated and you'll be disturbed, because it don't mean just able-bodied adults that ain't working. That's why it's so low. Right? Unemployment is what, 4%? I bet you know a lot of people that don't work, because I know I do. They ain't counted as unemployed, but that's another issue. Now let's talk about Posse Comitatus and the Insurrection Act. Posse Comitatus Act passed in 1879. It's basically that U.S. military cannot be used as a police force. This is what prevents Trump from just rolling out the military now. And I think a lot of the very people that were MAGA backers, the same kind of people that stormed the Capitol, they're going to be the ones who turn against Trump if he starts trying to roll out too many troops. And they know about the Posse Comitatus Act. Posse Comitatus Act is tied in. Listen, we're dealing with the aftermath of the Civil War still. A lot of our social problems are from the South and what went on, but I'm going to do another story on that. But Posse Comitatus was passed, I think, in 1879. Why 1879? Well, from 1866 till 1876, you had Reconstruction, where the freed slaves were being given land. They had the Freedmen's Bank set up. They were being integrated into things. They were allowed to vote. So there were black congressmen, even a few senators. I think there was a governor of Louisiana or South Carolina that was black for 10 years. And black people were doing very well coming fresh out of slavery. But it was because U.S. troops, the Union Army, was stationed in the South and had to stand outside at the polls with guns, simply so that the newly freed black citizens could exercise their constitutional right to vote. Because the Klan, there's been 3 eras of the Klan. The third era now is the Clown Klan. The second era started after the movie Birth of a Nation, peaked in the 1920s when the Klan would openly back candidates for governor like in Indiana, and they would win. And the first era was started there in the late 1869. Nathan Bedford Forrest, one of the, well, I won't use the word great, we'll just say highly skilled generals of the Confederacy, started the Ku Kluxers to deprive blacks of their ability to vote. But while the Union Army was down there, blacks were voting, and you had black politicians and black people were catching up and doing quite well, considering they're coming fresh out of chattel slavery. So what happens in 1876? There is a presidential election. Rutherford B. Hayes and Andrew Johnson. Correct me if I'm wrong. But what's not wrong is there was a tie in the Electoral College. So a backroom deal had to be made. The Democrats, who were at that time, that was the party of the Lincoln was a Republican. So the Republicans was the abolitionists, was the Union North Party, more so, though there were people on both sides in both regions of the country. The Democrats, the pro-slavery, slavery was legally over at that time, but they said, we'll let Rutherford B. Hayes, the Republican, be president But you gotta end Reconstruction. You gotta get the troops out of the South. And then about a year after that, there was a railroad strike. So it was good that the U.S. government was using Union troops to help to make sure blacks could vote. But they were also doing things like they used the troops to break strikes as anti-union things. See, this was the age of the trusts, where a lot of the great fortunes were made, Vanderbilt, the Rockefeller, because they were doing things that are now illegal. Well, read about the U.S. trust system. That's when you had, one set of companies totally dominate whole industries. So Rutherford B. Hayes, they were using Union troops to break railroad strikes, mining strikes. They're using it against workers. So a lot of the white working class wanted the Posse Comitatus Act, so the military couldn't be used against them in their union strikes, and the whites in the South wanted it so that they could stop blacks from voting. Posse Comitatus was passed. And the great age of the Ku Klux Klan being its most effective came into being 1880, for 10 years or so, where that was when they instituted the Reign of Terror. Blacks stopped voting. And their position immediately greatly deteriorated, obviously. So really from 1880 to World War I, when you started to have the Great Migration, a lot of black people moving to at least the cities of the South and up north, that 40-year stretch where the blacks were still in the South and they weren't being allowed any of their rights. They weren't slaves, but they were only a half step better. That was a real dark period for that portion of the American population. Oh, our sun just dropped. Well, I'm out in nature. Okay, so that's Posse Comitatus, 1879. Does not allow U.S. military to be used. But of course, the military is rolled out sometimes. You can riots, it's happened, etc. So that's the Insurrection Act, where you can temporarily, amongst other things, suspend Posse Comitatus. This has been used. It was used in the L.A. riot in 92. I think Trump, did he use it, or he wanted to use it during the George Floyd stuff? But no one was killed, really, during the George Floyd riots. Those don't even count as riots to me. I can't remember if he used it or not, but it was used definitely in L.A. in 92. During the 60s, it was used. A different, interesting use of it in the 50s. The little black girls in Little Rock, Arkansas, who were court mandated to be allowed to integrate the schools there in Arkansas, and the governor, Faubus of Arkansas, sent out the Arkansas National Guard to stop the black children from going into school. President Eisenhower did an Insurrection Act, because that was an insurrection. The governor was using Arkansas troops to stop federal law. He sent the 82nd Airborne, or 101st Airborne, whatever, to stand down the weak-ass Arkansas National Guard and to protect the children as they went in. So that was a different use of the Insurrection Act. So we see with these things, the country's so big, there's different things going on all over the place. You can say, oh, well, this is used for bad, but it's used for good over here, or depending who you are, you might think one is bad and one is good. People that are strong states' rights advocates, there's still people that would say, oh, well, if the people of Arkansas didn't want their schools integrated, they shouldn't have to be. George Wallace ran on that in the 70s and got electoral votes till they put one in his spizine, and he had to be taken care of by his black male nurse for the rest of his life. But that's another story. Read about George Wallace, presidential campaign, 1968, or was it 1972? He might have ran both times, George Wallace. Not the black comedian, the white presidential candidate, who espoused segregation. Segregation now, segregation forever. Strom Thurmond, senator, was a proponent of that. And if you don't know about Strom Thurmond, super racist, would when black people were in front of Congress, he would refer to them as nigras. And if they checked him about it, he'd say, oh, no, I'm saying nigra. I just have an accent. But, of course, late in his life in the 90s, it came out that he had a black daughter that he acknowledged and he had been taking care of all her life. She was like a 50-year-old woman when it came out. Look up Strom Thurmond. America, the land of lies. So that's what this. So if Trump, it looks like he's playing around. He wants to playing around with, can he institute martial law? Because that guy's not going to give up power. Now, mind you, during the January 6th murderous rampage of psychopaths who ran into the Capitol building, had a noose, they wanted to lynch people. Trump didn't invoke the Insurrection Act then, but he's going to try to invoke it to what? To send troops to cities. Now, for all of you dum-dums who like to repeat false stuff you hear because you think it makes you sound smart, Chicago, D.C., all these big cities, horrible things happening to them, and you can see new. But nonetheless, D.C. has its lowest crime in 50 years. All the crime rates peaked. They had this big peak during pandemic because police weren't doing shit while Trump was the president. It's funny. While Trump was the president, all of U.S. crime exploded. Now that Biden has been president and it went back down and he's back in, he wants to say the cities are out of control, I need to send in troops. It's not even true. Most of the big cities had huge spikes in crime for 2 years during the pandemic. They've come way down. D.C., all-time lowest crime rates. Chicago, again, there's certain neighborhoods, and because of rap music and the media, of the crazy shit that happens, you hear about it all. But the reality is, listen, take it from me, growing up, 80s, 90s, the cities were hardcore. I visited L.A. in 96. Tickets to the Rose Bowl, because I was going to Michigan. Remember we were out, we college students, people was with, they wanted some weed. We were like out on Hollywood Boulevard trying to buy weed. It was wild, and that wasn't even South Central. Like it was gang bang, drugged out, like it was wild. New York City, I remember visiting in 89 when I was like 12 or something. People were 87 I was there. Crack. I was a 12-year-old boy. We weren't even in bad neighborhoods. We were in like central Manhattan. Crack, smoke, rock. Everywhere you went, people just selling crack, just everywhere. It's crazy. Cities are much safer than they were in the past. We see the crazy things that go on, and of course social media amplifies, blah, blah, whoop-de-wop. The reality is Trump is trying to figure out ways he can use the laws to keep himself in power. He wants to do some sort of martial law. He's going to try to declare a state of emergency on the border, but his policies have effectively way slowed down illegal immigration, so he really has no justification to say that's why this whole bullshit with the cartels, and he's hyping them up to be so dangerous. Them cartels, they some Mexicans selling dope to people over here that want it. The Mexican cartels are not that sophisticated. They are not, and they ain't terrorists. They're selling stuff to people that want it, us the Americans. So, what do you think? Do you think Trump is playing around with trying to figure out how he can do martial law? And what do you think will happen with that? That's why I explained what Posse Comitatus, which would stop him from just using the military, or does, in the Insurrection Act, which he would attempt to implement to overcome Posse Comitatus. What do you think about all this, you guys? And what do you think about what is going to be the impact of maybe the U.S. in 2025 actually having a population decrease for the first time ever? Is that going to cause an economic problem, or is it going to help the people on the bottom to get jobs? I don't think so. Your thoughts are greatly appreciated. This has been your captain speaking, Al Prophet.